Support for Disrupted comes from the Connecticut Office of Film, Television, and Digital Media.
Actress Anna Deavere Smith is known for her roles in TV series like The West Wing.
It's worth mentioning that at this moment, we do not know the whereabouts of about a half dozen cell leaders, including bin Laden. But that's not my concern right now.
Nurse Jackie.
Whose taser is this? This is a weapon, okay?
And Blackish.
We're family. Yes. And the reason we're family is because we are united in our love for you two.
She's also the playwright and performer behind more than 15 one-woman shows. She writes scripts based on her interviews with real people. It's a style that she pioneered called verbatim theater.
We found it very unusual that Charles Lloyd, the top black attorney in this city, would take this case.
That's from the play Twilight, Los Angeles, 1992. It was nominated for a Tony Award, and the New York Times called it one of the 25 best plays of the last 25 years. Anna also founded the Institute on the Arts and Civic Dialogue. The organization helps develop works of art with a social message. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. Today we spend the hour with actress and playwright Anna Deavere Smith. I spoke with her at a live event in New Haven in late October. The event was part of the Artistic Congress, organized by Long Wharf Theater and the Yale Schwartzman Center. Our conversation happened the day before a public reading of Anna's newest work, This Ghost of Slavery, a play of past and present. That reading was held at Wesleyan University, where I now work. In our conversation, Anna mentions the tragedy at Mother Emanuel. That was the anti-Black shooting that happened at a church in Charleston, South Carolina in 2015. During that massacre, 9 Black people were killed during Bible study. A note for our listeners, this segment mentions mental health and suicide. Anna, one of the things that for me is so critical when we're thinking about the role of art, how it connects to community, is place and space. You grew up in Baltimore. You grew up on the cusp of what integration could look like. And I'm always curious how that experience shapes the work that you do, because so much of your work has been about understanding how advancement comes in these fits and starts. What did Baltimore mean to you as you thought about your artistic journey?
Right, and that's changing right now. I will say that I know there's a lot of artists here, we don't always know why we do what we do. And I made a very specific decision after I was trained. And I was trained at a time when most of the content that we worked with as actors was material written by white, heterosexual presenting men. And at the end of that, which I'm not entirely sure why, because there's a gap between the 60s and this, which was the late 70s, this desire to hear from more than white, heterosexual presenting men in the theater. So if you are not that, what we need you to do is write about yourself. And so my generation did a lot to help change the canon. But I made a choice not to write about myself, and not to write about Baltimore, not to write about Maryland, but to chase that which is not me. And I used the tape recorder in the way that Mary Ellen Mark, a fantastic American photographer, the late Mary Ellen Mark, wrote in her wonderful catalog, American Odyssey, that she used the camera. The camera created the necessary distance for her to come close to strangers. And that's what the tape recorder did. And then something my grandfather said, which is what if you say a word often enough, it becomes you, that I set out to go deliberately where I did not belong and to try to become America word for word. And I think that in large part, the purpose was to deal with having grown up in a segregated city where I was told you don't belong there, and you don't belong there, and don't go over there because they don't care about you, and you shouldn't care about them. And so to deal with that crisis, I think I went this very long route away from me. And now, two of my works, one which will be read tomorrow in progress, This Ghost of Slavery, is about Maryland in 1864, during the Civil War. And I'm also going to write a play about something that came up when Skip Gates, Henry Louis Gates, did my roots for his show, which is about on my father's side, nonetheless, the maternal great-great-uncle, my Uncle Biggs. I had an Uncle Biggs, and then a great-uncle Biggs, and then a great-great-uncle Biggs that nobody told me about. And I have been commissioned to write a project about them. So I'm now uncovering that which is me. After 40 years, because I developed this way of working that's now called verbatim theater in 1980, with the deliberate purpose on the road to search for American character. And I knew that I felt that required to go to what I did not belong to in order to ultimately have a sense of belonging about America. And you and I were talking backstage about how we're not planning to go anywhere, no matter what happens in this election, because we have a stake. We have a stake here.
We had a really extensive conversation about that, about deserving to be in a place, to do more than just claim space, but to define that space, even when your definition does not fit the tongue that others imagine for you. You don't play characters, you inhabit people and their experiences. And they don't have to be people whose identity or experience matches your own. One of the things that I heard you say is that you are intentional about not wearing shoes when you are inhabiting these other people and their lives. Talk to us about that decision to do that, and how it helps shape how you find you, but also how you honor the others that you are representing.
Well, I should just say that I don't inhabit people. I'm for rent. I only perform people who would actually be screaming from a mountaintop. I just happen to be walking by. And if in the course of an interview, I think her person is anxious about talking to me or doesn't want to talk to me, I stop and I leave. So because my work is about disruption and discord, and the things that don't come together, there's lots of people who would like to talk and be heard. So that's no problem. So, and to endure the stage, I have to have material that's come from a really strong will to communicate. So I don't inhabit people. I'm for rent. I'm available to borrow these stories with their permission and to speak on their behalf. I would put it that way. You know, the thing about the shoes was very practical. Like, it took 13 shows, and I was 41 when my work got any recognition. And again, it didn't take off until 1991. I started the process in 1980. The search for American character. And shoes were always a hard thing to figure out. Like, what kind of shoes should I wear to play all these different kinds of people, right? And also, shoes change your relationship to gravity. That's very important in terms of identity. And so that was number one. It's hard to figure out a shoe. And then Fires the Mirror, which was the show that finally, got some attention. Candy Donnelly, who was a costume designer, we had a very limited budget. So it was like, what is she going to wear? It was like a used men's suit and a used white shirt. And we decided we didn't have money for shoes. So there was a practical part. But the point about what I realized about being with the bare foot is it really does show that I'm for rent, right? It makes my foot available for an occasional shoe that will change my relationship to gravity and make a big difference. But I also, because the work is hard and I'm always terrified, I wanted to feel grounded. And I went down to Mother Emanuel after that tragedy. Yes. And I don't know if you remember, there was a woman preacher very briefly. And I went down there, and when I interviewed her, she told me that the first thing she does when she gets behind the pulpit is take her shoes off, because she feels it makes her closer to God. And that's years, many years after I sort of made that decision. But I do want to feel firmly planted in the ground and to feel like I'm coming from the ground.
I'm also curious about all of these thousands of interviews that you've done throughout your career. You have heard very difficult things in those interviews where people are sharing their personal experiences. It's an intimate moment to be able to capture that, even when people want to talk and have a lot to say. How do you as an artist hold space for that they are inviting you into that, and also that you in some ways end up carrying some of that weight, whether it is the pain of it, the torment, and even the joy? How do you balance that as an artist and creator?
Well, it's an enormous privilege. I assume that anybody I'm talking to could say, that's a stupid question. So I don't take any moment whatsoever for granted. And I feel, like I said, it's a gift that I've been given to hold that story. And then my work is to try to hold it with great respect. This will sound like I'm bragging, but I'm not. I'll say it, and I know
it's okay.
I'll say it, and I want to know what you think about it, because it's related to what you're talking about. I went to New Orleans right after Katrina. I made several trips, and I interviewed a lot of people there. And one of them was a young white doctor named Kirsta Kurtz-Burke, who worked at Charity Hospital, the former Charity Hospital. It was always a debate about whether Charity or Bellevue were the first hospital for poor people in America. And she told the story about sitting by a patient's bedside during that awful time, and her coming to realize with him that they were going to be the last to get out. Because they were poor, that her patients were poor Black people who were going to be the last to get out. And she tells that story. And, not everything that I do ends up like in a lot being done after the show's over. Right. But Kirsta was somebody who I performed a lot, and people always responded to her generosity of spirit, the way she understood, her extraordinary compassion for people who were very different than she was, who didn't have the privileges she had had. And so she was a very important person kind of in my thousands now of people I've talked to. And I got a text from someone who knew me, had met me somewhere randomly and knew I knew her, and told me that she had committed suicide. Oh my. And I had been planning to take material from that play, Let Me Down Easy, which I wrote here originally at the Yale School of Medicine, when they asked me to look at the relationship of doctors and patients and to see if doctors listen. We know they don't. And I know your daughter's going to be one, but she'll be different.
She'll listen.
She'll listen. Some of them do, some of them don't. But anyway, that play was supposed about healthcare, was really about death in so many ways. And so I was going to be doing this past May, the excerpts from Let Me Down Easy, as part of, I was the 73rd Mellon Lecturer at the National Gallery, and I had to do 4 lectures, and I wanted one of them to be about Let Me Down Easy. So her husband also had reached out to me about Kirsta, and he had come to see me perform her and stuff like that. And so I contacted him to see how he felt about me performing it, and whether I should say anything about her suicide, and if so, what I should say. And he told me that one of the last things she looked at before she died was my performance of her. And that means a lot to me because it was so long ago that I did that interview.
For me, with every guest I interview, I know it's an honor and a privilege that people are able to share that. And I walk away from those interviews the way that I walk away from performances. What am I supposed to think in this moment? What am I supposed to feel in this moment? And then what am I supposed to do in that moment? And that is the privilege that we have in these spaces of public life and civic life. But it's also the opportunity. I don't think we have the luxury of just being in a space and saying, I have a title, I have a position, if we have no impact. And I want us to think about this space that we are in. It is intentional that it is called an artistic Congress for democracy, because democracy feels so fragile. Does anyone else feel that way, right? And that fragility isn't just about election outcomes. It is about our inability to see humanity in each other, to affirm civility. And I want to share your words on this. You said art convenes. It's not just inspirational, it is aspirational. It pricks the walls of our compartmentalized minds, opens our hearts, and makes us brave. And that's what we need most in our country today. You wrote that piece after President Obama's inauguration, where he was talking about the need for a we nation. How do you see that holding up or playing out today? What does it mean for us to be brave today?
Well, I mean, that's really, really big. We have to say the things that are hard to say. We have to carry the feelings that are hard to carry. And we have to be ready to ask our audiences. I think we have to, when I'm saying it's going to be very unpopular, we have to make a shift now because we've been very nervous. I've been teaching for 50 years. My students, starting in 2010, have become very nervous about saying the wrong thing in class, performing the wrong thing. We warn our audiences about what's going to be hard to see. But you said something, I'm going to be unpopular because I think we have to shift that. Mm-hmm. But you said something that I hope you don't assume all audience members are like you. You said you leave the theater thinking about, what am I supposed to think? And there's something in the middle, and then something really important. What am I supposed to do? Mm-hmm. Think, feel, do. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons I started the Institute on the Arts and Civic Dialogue in the end of the 90s was because people would come backstage after, let's say, Twilight Los Angeles, about the Los Angeles riots, all of that pain, all of that violence, all of that disruption, and they'd come backstage and say, where's the hope? What's my takeaway? Mm-hmm. Most people are not going to experience art as a way to have the exercise of what am I supposed to think, what am I supposed to feel, what am I supposed to do? Mm-hmm. And the whole reason I started the Institute on the Arts and Civic Dialogue was to have learning in a community with lots and lots of artists, and I produced all of their work for 3 years, 3 summers, lots of different things, because I thought, is there something wrong with the way our work is made that it doesn't elicit, especially that last question? Mm-hmm. What am I supposed to do, right? Because I think that if art is meant to be or could have the opportunity to be a tool for democracy, we need our audiences to ask not what's the takeaway or where's the hope, which is like, how can I feel better tonight? Mm-hmm. 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 How can you make me happy tonight about a tragedy? Mm-hmm. What can I do? What can I do? And so that was my question. Is there something structural that needs to be adjusted to invite audiences to ask that question? What shall I do? What can I do? Because that's activism.
Right.
That's activism. The activists are the people who intoxicate the citizens in front of them to say, I want to help.
If you or someone you know is struggling, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration National Helpline is 1-800-622-HELP. That's 1-800-622-4357. You're listening to my conversation with playwright and actress Anna Deavere Smith. Coming up, Anna explains the value of fretting about something when creating art. This is Disrupted. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, we're talking with actress and playwright Anna Deavere Smith. I spoke with her at a live event in New Haven in October. The event included an audience Q&A. And earlier in our conversation, Anna mentioned the relationship between gravity and identity. One audience member wanted to know more about that relationship.
It has to do with how you move in the world and what you do with your weight in the world, right? So if I put on combat boots, it's not just that the combat boot means something in terms of what it looks like, but my foot is doing something different in the world than it would in a stiletto heel. You know, then it's a good question that you ask, because I should clarify that when I talk about identity, my project for all these years has been about American identity, and particular, what's the relationship of language to identity. But I'm not talking about the identity in a psychiatric sense. I'm really talking about what Bertolt Brecht called gestus. I'm talking about persona. So, you know, persona, and when we, in the theater, identity is, it goes back in the European theater, and I'm sure there's something similar in other forms of non-Western theater, is commedia dell'arte. Like, you know, that's the doctor because of what he looks like. You know, and in our world now, it's like typecasting, right? So I'm talking about theatrical identity, or gestus, or persona. And so that person in a combat boot, that line, the way that boot hits the floor and the way it causes the body to align is already making a certain presentation or a persona.
Another audience member asked Anna if her courage had ever faltered, and if so, how she dealt with it.
Well, you know, I mean, I think courage is a daily process. I mean, I don't think it's a given. I'm interested in how other people have courage. I've been working now for 3 years with 2 groups of girls, teenage girls, and now some non-binary youth. Black girls in Baltimore, my high school, which is now all black. It wasn't when I went there, and Native American girls in Northern California. And some of what I learned from them is represented in the play that will be at Wesleyan tomorrow. And I have to just mark that President Biden has apologized.
And I think it's important
For the Indian
that.
boarding schools and what happened. And we deal with that material. The very disturbing congressional arguments about the boarding schools, which boil down to it's going to be cheaper to educate them than to continue to try to annihilate them. That's in our records of our Congress. Nobody made that up. And I'm learning from these particular young people about courage because of what they have to survive on a daily basis. One of them, who grew up in a shelter and lived with her sister who had 9 children in Baltimore, in that house, trying to do homework, is going to Hopkins. Is it Hopkins now this year? young Native American Yurok girl who I so admire, who's had a really tough time, gets her courage by going to the river. Thank God this year the dams finally came down. Salmon fishing tribe in Northern California. And so I get refueled about courage, it wouldn't surprise you, by the people around me who are constantly revealing that courage. And then in terms of the courage that it takes to do my work, I just try to surround myself with people who want to be in the trenches with me, and in particular with people who disagree with me and who are tough critics, because part of where my courage falters is about criticism. The late Mike Nichols promised, and it never happened, and we would never have done this, but that the real test of my courage and maturity would be if he could walk me around the lobby on the night that the critics were coming and say hello to greet them all. Now, I won't be doing that before my... But I think, that would have been really something if I said, this is going to be part of my work. I'm going to walk out there on the night they come and walk around and shake their hand before I go on stage. I mean, how do you get the courage when you get ready to write something or ask a question that may be unpopular? I mean, what do you do?
So Anna and I backstage ended up asking each other, are you fearless? Do you think of yourself as fearless? And I thought her answer would be absolutely. And it was no, you only have to tell me one time. And then I listened. And I said, I am very curious, but also very cautious. And where I find that courage is thinking about what it takes for a person to even sit down for a conversation. What it takes for a student whose parents never went to college are scraping funds together to send them to school. What it takes for that student to show up at my office and say, I didn't understand that. Can you help me? And if they can do that.
My favorite kind of student, by the way.
Right, mine too. Send them all to me, please.
Favorite.
If they can do that, then certainly I can do hard things. And it always feels like on the other side of it, why was I so stressed about that? But I think it also is about the respect that we have for what stands in front of us. Our conversation happened before the presidential election. And of course, there was an audience member who wanted to know more about our discussion on whether to leave the United States. I'm born and raised in Virginia. My grandfather had a 6th grade education because he was the youngest boy. And when all of his brothers had to go fight for democracy overseas that they could not enjoy here, he had to leave school to take care of his mother, who had become a widow at that time. Every time, my husband and I are from the same town, every time we go home, we see the legacy of that. We see what it meant to have the Blue Ridge Mountains for Black and Indigenous folks, that when the schools were integrated, Indigenous kids had no school to go to because Virginia gave you 2 choices, you're Black, you're white, there's nothing else. How dare I give that up? So I see myself as a Native daughter, that I deserve to be here. I deserve for my elders to know that what they fought for, we are building something greater. And I refuse to cede that to a person, an ideology, a party, an election, because I am the product of people who were willing to take risk. And let me just be really plain here. I'm not convinced it's actually going to be better for me somewhere else. I'm just saying. All right, I've traveled quite a bit. It means something to know what you're facing, to be able to call a thing, and for President Biden to say, this was wrong. Now, it doesn't fix, right? It does not erase that, but the acknowledgement of a harm can go a long way toward healing. That's why I refuse to leave.
When I was 21, when I got out of college, I had $80 in an overnight bag, and I went across this country with a promise never to take another dime from my parents. And I did that. And just that trip in a car across this country, this time of year, exactly, the West Virginia hills, arriving for the first time in New Mexico, the first time I really, because, they pushed the Native Americans, the Piscataway, out of Maryland early on. First time I saw what that really was, the Native people. Arizona, ending up in California. There's something about the expanse of the land. And then, as one of many examples, I mentioned my great-great-uncle Basil Biggs in Gettysburg, which they didn't tell us this, and we went there all the time, unbelievable, was a part of the Underground Railroad. And he got the contract to bury the dead in Gettysburg. He hired the men who buried the dead. And apparently, according to Henry Louis Gates, I haven't fact-checked it, but, we go back to the 17th century, the Smiths and the Youngs. And so I feel very much a part of all of this, and I feel I have a share in it, not that a gift, but I have a responsibility in it. I'm a race woman. My mother was a person who would not let somebody leave the 6th grade if they couldn't read. She brought them home, sat them down at the table. All my aunts. So we're educators. We're trying to make a difference that way. I come from a tradition of service, and I'm just not going to give up on that.
And I think the ways that we see that as an act of defiance and resistance, but also,
well, that's us too, right?
That is
that
encoded.
Is Black folks also, is that we are only here because of resistance. Mm-hmm. That resistance is the core of survival, as has been for us. Mm-hmm. It's just a fact, right? Mm-hmm.
And finally, a student at Yale School of Drama asked Anna how she begins her artistic process.
One of the most inspiring things I heard about beginnings was when I interviewed Toni Morrison at the 92nd Street Y. And she said she knows she's ready to write when she's fretting about something. And, it's like you're here with your disruption. I'm here with my commitment to learn about things when they are in disarray. I think that the whole thing is you're in the Yale School of Drama, and drama, the formerly known as Yale School of Drama, but drama is about conflict, and I would say that yes, there's a responsibility. Yes, you need courage. Yes, all those things, but I would kind of just slide that away and ask myself, what am I fretting about? What troubles me about this in a good way, right? That there's energy in that, because that means, or what's my real question? So where is it most rough? Where is most of the work to be done? And that's how you know where to start.
You're listening to playwright and actress Anna Deavere Smith, answering questions at an event about the politics of art. Coming up, Anna talks about the value of doubt. This is Disrupted. Stay with us. Welcome back to Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. This hour, you're hearing my conversation with playwright and actress Anna Deavere Smith. It was recorded live in New Haven this past October. Anna has written more than 15 one-woman shows, including Notes from the Field about the school-to-prison pipeline. It's currently streaming on HBO.
One of the huge investments that we made was in the criminal justice system. And that investment was made at the expense of other investments. We have taken dollars that we used to give and that we could give to invest in the issue of mental illness. It's not that we're not investing in mental illness. We are. We're investing in it in the prison system.
Anna and I talked the day before a reading of her new play, This Ghost of Slavery, a play of past and present. When I asked her to tell me more about the new play, she started by discussing notes from the field.
I wrote a play about the school-to-prison pipeline because someone asked me if I ever heard of it. I said no, and they wanted me to learn about it, so they brought me to this place where I spent a day hearing about it, and I heard a story that made me fret, which was about a kid who peed in a water cooler in Baltimore, and they were going to take him to jail. And I had not thought about anything. I hadn't thought about public education in Baltimore. I've been teaching in, Carnegie Mellon and USC and Stanford and NYU, and hadn't thought about it in years and years. And I just thought, oh my God, I have to go home. By that I mean metaphorically, back to the teachers and the servers who I told you about. And I was on a show called Nurse Jackie, as a fabulous British...
It's a pretty great show.
Fabulous British actress, Eve Best. We were in hair and makeup together, and I said, I heard this most disturbing story, fretting, about a kid in my hometown who peed in a water cooler, and they were going to take him to jail. And she said, well, whatever happened to mischief? And it just was like, oh my God. Middle class and rich people get mischief. But the rest of the kids get pathologized and they get on this road to jail, right? And after doing that, working on that and doing 250 interviews in 5 different geographic areas of the United States and having the play, here, there, everywhere, and then London and HBO, I just started to think about, how did this happen? How could I have talked to a young man who, by the time he left the foster care system, had like 40 placements between group homes, and how did that happen? And I had a chance when Atlantic Magazine wanted me to write something, and I thought, well, I'm going to look in history to see what I can find out about how we got here. Because they'll have good researchers and stuff like that. And I tripped over something, lo and behold, again, in my home state, in Maryland, which was that Maryland did not free the slaves until 1864. It wasn't in the Confederacy, but it was half slave and half free. And the day after emancipation, they voted for emancipation. The day after emancipation, they took the children back onto the plantations. The girls, to keep the girls until they were 18 and the boys till they were 21. And so I went to the Maryland State Archives and I just dug around in the arguments that were all about, A, whether to free the slaves, and B, what to do with the children. And I also found out of my interest with the Native American girls that I'm getting to know, and also because the tribe, that Yurok tribe, was a very important part of the School to Prison Pipeline play, that it's a really interesting moment in American history, right? 1864, in Maryland, they're arguing about taking the kids back to the plantations because they're helpless and uneducated, and should they be educated? Or would that mean we're saying that they're equal, that blacks are equal to whites? And soon after that is when a man named Richard Pratt, Brigadier General Richard Pratt, comes up with this idea, save the man, kill the Indian. And those were the arguments in Congress about the fact that it would be cheaper to educate them than to continue to try to annihilate them because they're not dying. It's a really interesting moment because the question is about the civilizing mission, the so-called civilizing mission in our education system, and what does that mean, right?
You mentioned giving the Mellon lectures, and you titled them Chasing That Which Is Not Me, Chasing That Which Is Me. What is it that is Anna Deavere Smith now, given your career?
You mean in this whole journey of, I gave the Jefferson lectures in 2015, and that was called Chasing That Which Is Not Me. So when I was asked to do the Mellon lectures, I thought I should come full circle, in part because of this stuff now about my family, about Maryland, about Gettysburg, that I am on this journey now, finally, like most of my generation, to write about me. I mean, by that I mean, these heritage stories. One major inspiration for me as I put together the Jefferson lectures, 4 of them, was an extraordinary painting by Jack Whitten that I saw at first at the Museum of Modern Art, and just beautiful. But it looked like he had, he worked with kitchen tools and all these things, like just layers and layers of paint and broken things, and it was called Atopolis, which is a made-up word. Like polis means city, Atopolis means no place. It was about no place. And he quoted a Martinique poet and writer, Edouard Glissant, who was a classmate of Fanon, but he didn't go the way of revolution. He went the way of thinking in a different way about non-belongingness and about the need, really, to put it very, very simply, that our predicament is relational. It's about relationships. So in their case, Martinique is a colony, a French colony. So it's about how you figure out that gap, I would say, in my language. And I've always thought about acting even as not something where I am the thing or I am inhabited by the thing, but I think about it as a broad jump towards the other. And there's a big gap, and I might not make it. And so when I'm in that space, I'm not me. I can never be them. I'm the not. I'm not me. I'm not that. I'm the not. I'm another kind of positive.
We then took more questions from the audience, and Anna was asked her opinion about the Washington Post's decision not to endorse anyone in the 2024 presidential election.
When I first heard this about the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times, honestly, my first reaction was, great, more for us to do as artists. More for us to do. More reasons for us to say the wrong thing and get in trouble. And to stand up for power. To stand up to power. We've said that's what we do. They say that's what they do. That they're these truth tellers. Well, the Washington Post, that's my first reaction is, well, let's get busy. Let's claim the space of the arts, to your question, with courage, however we find it, because somebody's got to. Now, look, Johnny Cochran told me there's 3 sides to every story, yours, mine, and the truth. So we can't go around saying we tell the truth, but we can at least be willing to walk in a field of possibilities and even lies to come up with something else. That was my first thought, was it's really important for us to do our work and to have courage and to carry the mantle that we claim we do, which is to be in the humanizing project. And especially with AI, to be asking with great vigor, what does it mean to be a human being?
The final question of the night came from one of Anna's former students. The student asked her about experiencing doubt.
Oh, I love doubt. And, I marked 2010 in my 50 years of teaching as a time that things shifted. And that's when I started to say on the first day of every class, and I think I said in the first day of your class, confidence is overrated, give doubt a try. Because, you know, I think that for us as artists, we're not in a court of law. We're not trying to prove anything in science. The not so sure, what Professor Homi Bhabha at Harvard talked to me about, the almost but not quite, or the not. It's a very creative space, right? When you go outside and like today, everything is bright as can be. Oh, that's a house and that's a tree. But when Vanessa was walking me here in this really weird route that reminded me of what it must have been like in the Middle Ages, these buildings here at Yale, I mean, and I couldn't, and I couldn't see anything, and this girl was walking towards me, and I thought, is she in pajamas? And they were pajamas, but
Indeed.
I guess at the moment that I wasn't quite sure, is that pajamas or a clown suit or what is it? So I mean, I think we have to live in doubt, and doubt being that I'm not. You know, this is the last thing I'm going to say. I was doing a piece for the Museum of Modern Art, and I talked to this conservateur, and he was so in love with Picasso. And he said, you know, his confidence, I just wish I could paint like that for 15 minutes. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, even when you think he made a mistake, he didn't. He was changing his mind. And so that's one way to go, and you could be Picasso. But there are all these other ways, and I just think there's something very, very, very beautiful about doubt. And I will never forget how Cherry Jones said the last line of that play on Broadway, I have doubt.
I want to leave this audience with your words again. You wrote this in letters to a young artist, but I think for all of us, there's a lesson here. You wrote, commit to finding the true nature of art. Go for that thing no one can teach you. Go for the communion, the real communion with your soul, and the discipline of expressing that communion with others. That doesn't come from competition. That comes from being one with what you are doing. And as we heard from you earlier tonight, run toward the thing that makes you fret. Join me in thanking Anna Deavere Smith.
And look, we're not going to forget thinking, feeling, doing. Yeah.
That was my conversation with actress and playwright Anna Deavere Smith. She's appeared in The West Wing, Nurse Jackie, and many more TV series and movies. She's written and performed more than 15 one-woman shows, including Twilight, Los Angeles, 1992. Disrupted is produced by Kevin Chang Barnum, Robin Doyon-Aiken, Meg Fitzgerald, and Meg Dalton. You can listen to all the previous episodes of Disrupted by finding us wherever you get your podcasts. And you can listen to new episodes every Friday at 9 a.m. From Connecticut Public Radio, this is Disrupted. I'm Kalila Brown-Dean. Here's to creating art together.